When your ex-husband abandons you to face cancer alone, you build a new life until a desperate knock proves your hard-won peace is about to be repossessed by monsters. The silence in the house was a living thing, heavy and suffocating, much like the air in the hospital waiting room had been 3 years ago. I traced the rim of my cold coffee mug, the ceramic gritty under my thumb. That day, the day the doctor used words like aggressive and prognosis, was the day the scaffolding of my life collapsed. I remember holding the ultrasound printout, a crinkled piece of paper showing something that was supposed to be our future, and realizing my present was already dust. He was gone before the biopsy results were even back. Not with a fight, not with a drawn-out argument, just a swift surgical removal of himself from my existence. His note, propped against the fruit bowl, was brutally efficient. 3 sentences. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. Don't try to find me. The irony tasted like bile. He wasn't strong enough for a difficult conversation, let alone for the war I was about to wage against my own body. I never told him about the chemo, the radiation burns, the sheer paralyzing terror of waking up every morning wondering if this was the day the cancer would finally win. I fought that war alone, fueled by spite and sheer bloody-minded refusal to die before I finished the new garden bed he'd always promised we'd build, and I won. The remission came, clean and undeniable, a miracle whispered by skeptical oncologists. I rebuilt my life brick by painstaking brick. I bought the house, my house now, and I planted that damn garden bed, filling it with flowers so vibrant they seemed to mock the grayscale memory of my illness. I had finally found a peace that was entirely mine, a resilience forged in the crucible of near death. I had finally reached a point where his absence was just a fact, like the slightly warped floorboard in the hallway, annoying but manageable. That fragile peace shattered precisely at 7:18 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sky outside was the bruised purple of a dying day, and I was grading papers. I teach literature now, poetry mostly, the rhythm of well-constructed sorrow, when the knock came. It wasn't the sharp rap of a delivery driver or the hesitant tap of a neighbor. It was firm, heavy, and possessed a familiarity that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. It was a knock I hadn't heard in 1,000 lifetimes, yet knew intimately. I froze, pen hovering over a student's misplaced semicolon. The sound echoed in the quiet house, a drumbeat from a past I had meticulously buried. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. 3 years of careful healing, 3 years of ensuring every door and window was locked against the ghosts of my past, and there it was, demanding entry. I didn't move. I couldn't. The terror wasn't about a break-in. It was about recognition. I knew who it was before I saw the shadow shift under the frosted glass of the door panel. It was him, my ex-husband, and he sounded desperate. A second knock, harder this time, followed by a weak, choked sound that might have been my name. I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a ragged breath, my hand instinctively flying to the locket hidden beneath my collarbone, the one my mother gave me before she passed. I had moved on. I had survived. But facing him, standing there on the threshold of the life I built after he abandoned me, felt like being asked to willingly step back onto the operating table. My fingers trembled as I slowly pushed myself up from the desk, my throat tight with unshed tears and volcanic anger. I walked toward the door, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, each step a betrayal of the self-sufficient woman I had become. I reached for the deadbolt, my hand shaking so violently I almost missed the cold metal. I pulled the door open just a crack, peering out into the twilight, ready to unleash 3 years of justified fury, but the words died in my throat. He wasn't just standing there, looking tired or regretful. He was leaning against the frame, his expensive coat ripped at the shoulder, his face pale and slick with sweat, and his eyes, wide with panic, weren't looking at me. They were fixed on something over my shoulder, something inside my hallway, and as he tried to stammer out an apology, a low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness behind me. The growl was not human. It was deep, resonant and carried the raw, unmistakable vibration of a predator alerted. It scraped along my nerves, instantly overriding the complex emotional circuitry that was screaming, "It's him!" My gaze snapped from his ashen face to the dark mouth of my entryway. I hadn't heard a sound inside. I live alone, or I thought I did. My ex, Liam, didn't flinch from the sound. He reacted to it as if it were a physical blow. His desperation doubled, morphing into sheer terror. "Anna, listen to me, please," he choked out, shoving his weight against the door, trying to force his way in, not to confront me, but seemingly to use my house as a shield. "You have to let me in now. They followed me. They're right behind me." "Who followed you, Liam?" My voice was a reedy whisper, utterly unfamiliar to my own ears. I gripped the edge of the doorframe, anchoring myself against the sudden, terrifying reality that my carefully constructed sanctuary had just been breached by something far worse than my past. "What in God's name are you talking about?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he let go of the door and stumbled backward onto the porch mat, clutching his left arm. That's when I saw it, a dark, spreading stain soaking through the fine wool of his jacket sleeve. Not a small scrape, but a deep, ragged wound. And beneath the street lamp's sickly yellow glow, his eyes flickered down to the wound, and a wave of nausea visibly washed over him. "It wasn't supposed to come to this," he gasped, slumping slightly. I thought I lost them in the city gridlock. They're fast, Anna. Faster than anything I've ever seen." My mind raced, trying to reconcile the Liam who couldn't handle a cancer diagnosis with the man currently vibrating with adrenaline. Speaking of pursuers and wounds, this wasn't my Liam. This was someone who had clearly walked through a different kind of fire while I was recovering from mine. "Who is they, Liam?" I demanded, stepping slightly out onto the threshold, pulling the door slightly ajar, exposing him more fully to the night air, but also giving me a better view of the empty sidewalk behind him. The street was quiet. Too quiet. He pushed himself up again, leaning heavily against the doorframe, his breath coming in shallow, desperate gasps. "The collectors," he whispered, the words sounding ancient and heavy. "They track what you take, and I took something that belonged to them. They want it back. They don't ask. They just take." He looked past me again, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. The growl from inside the house sounded again, closer this time, accompanied by a low, scraping sound, like heavy claws dragging over hardwood floor. It was moving towards the front hall. "Anna, for the love of God, you have to hide me. I need 20 minutes, just 20 minutes to get a message out. Don't let them in. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, don't open the door to them." He tried to lunge past me, but his injured arm gave out, and he pitched forward, collapsing onto the welcome mat in a heap. I stared down at him, the man who broke me, now a broken thing at my feet, bleeding, terrified, begging sanctuary from an unseen enemy that was currently exploring my living room. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing. If I helped him, I was inviting unimaginable danger into the home I fought so hard to secure. If I abandoned him, I was condemning him to whatever fate his collectors had planned, and I wasn't sure I could live with that choice, not after everything I'd survived. Before I could make a decision, the scraping sound stopped right behind the thin veneer of the front door. Then came a sound far worse than the growl, the slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap of something hard and pointed. Testing the wood paneling, right where Liam's head was resting, the wood began to splinter inward, a fine dark dust snowing onto Liam's tangled hair. I looked down at the man who had left me to die, and then I looked at the splintering door, realizing the thing inside wasn't a monster. It was something that hunted monsters. And now it knew Liam, and by extension, me was here. I made the split-second choice born of pure instinct, not forgiveness. I slammed the door shut, twisting the deadbolt home with a jarring thunk, plunging the porch into near darkness. But as I turned to face the inner threat, Liam's eyes fluttered open, locking onto mine with a desperate plea, and he whispered one final terrifying phrase before his consciousness slipped away. "It's not just after me, Anna. It knows about the other thing you survived." The other thing? I hissed, my voice raw, adrenaline finally overriding the shock. Liam's head lolled against the mahogany, his breathing shallow, the wound on his arm weeping sluggishly, pooling darkly on the welcome mat. The thin wood separating us from the entity inside groaned under renewed pressure. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a slow, steady application of force, like a massive hydraulic press, testing the limits of the frame. My mind screamed for context, for a logical framework to place this nightmare into. Cancer was a biological enemy. This was something else entirely. Something that hunted based on perceived debts. Something that had followed my self-absorbed, abandoning ex-husband across state lines. And now, it was inside my house, alerted by the scent of his fresh blood and perhaps something far deeper. "What did you take, Liam?" I demanded, keeping my voice low, aiming it at his ear as I knelt beside him, ignoring the pain of the floorboards digging into my knees. I grabbed the heavy antique brass fire poker from the stand by the hearth, my only viable weapon. It felt pathetically inadequate against whatever was currently flexing its strength against my front door. His eyelids fluttered. A weak, rattling breath escaped him. The inheritance. Not the money. The source. He didn't tell you, did he? What you survived. It wasn't natural luck, Anna. It was interference. Interference. The word hung in the air, chilling me more thoroughly than the sudden drop in temperature radiating from the front door. My cancer, my victory over the disease, wasn't luck. It was something he had stolen, something he now possessed, and the collectors were here to reclaim the collateral. The wood of the door buckled inward with a sickening crack, not a splintering noise, but a deep, structural failure. A sliver of blackness appeared where the paint had just been solid. A void deeper than any shadow, framed by the tearing fiber of the oak. I scrambled backward, dragging Liam's limp weight with me, pulling him away from the immediate breach point toward the relative safety of the living room archway. The scraping sound resumed, louder now, accompanied by a low, wet sniffing. It was smelling the air, mapping the space. "Stay quiet," I warned Liam uselessly, though he was already unconscious again. I retreated into the living room, positioning myself behind the heavy oak writing desk, the one I inherited from my grandmother, using it as a meager barrier. I leveled the fire poker, heart hammering against my ribs, preparing for the confrontation. If this thing crossed the threshold, it was going to meet the full, unadulterated rage of the woman who survived terminal illness alone. The front door didn't burst open with violent aggression. Instead, the massive piece of wood that had been stressed by the pressure fell inward with a heavy, silent thud, perfectly clearing the doorway. It lay flat on the hardwood floor, as if carefully placed, and then it stepped through. It wasn't a ghost or a shadow. It was physically present, utterly alien. It was tall, impossibly lean, and clad in what looked like perfectly tailored charcoal gray fabric that absorbed the ambient light, making it appear almost two-dimensional against the wallpaper. It moved with a fluid grace that defied its apparent height. Where a face should have been, there was only polished, obsidian smoothness, reflecting the dim light of the hallway lamp in a distorted smear. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, but I felt overwhelmingly scrutinized. And yet this creature was not the source of the growl. As the collector, if that's what it was, took its first silent step onto the rug, the real danger announced itself from the far end of the hallway, near the kitchen. The growl returned, louder, closer, and accompanied by the heavy, thudding impact of something massive running at speed. It was coming from the back of the house, from the direction of the garden I had built. The sleek charcoal figure froze mid-stride, its blank head snapping up toward the sound from the kitchen. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration emanated from its body, a soundless signal of alarm or perhaps recognition. Before I could process the dual threat, the silent collector in the front hall and the charging behemoth from the back, the wall of the kitchen, the one directly behind the linen closet, exploded outward. Plaster dust billowed like smoke, and through the sudden gaping hole, a shape lunged. Bulky, matted fur the color of dried mud, teeth like broken shards of ivory, and eyes that burned with feral, terrifying intelligence. It wasn't interested in the collector. It zeroed in on the bleeding, unconscious form of Liam sprawled near the desk. The brute roared, a sound that vibrated the very foundation of the house and covered the remaining distance in a heartbeat, landing squarely on Liam's chest. The collector in the front hall finally moved, but not toward the attacking beast. It spun on its heel, raising a slender arm, and from its fingertips bloomed a tiny, intensely bright sphere of pure white light, aimed directly at me. Liam's last words echoed in my head. "It knows about the other thing you survived." The light hit me, not with heat, but with a crushing, invasive pressure, searing into my memory, reaching for that buried secret, just as the massive, snarling beast pinned my ex-husband to the floor and began to tear into him, forcing me to watch as the thing that abandoned me was devoured by something far worse, while the silent assassin from the front door held me down with pure, psychic force. The white light was not pain, but violation. It bypassed my optic nerve entirely, driving straight into the core of my consciousness, dredging up memories I had successfully walled off since the diagnosis. The sterile smell of the infusion center, the metallic tang of fear, the moment the doctor told me the cancer was not responding to treatment, and the bizarre, fleeting sensation afterward, a moment of absolute clarity, a surge of borrowed strength that pushed the disease back. It was that memory the light was latching onto. Interference. Liam's word echoed in the mental scream the light induced. I couldn't move my limbs, held rigid by the pressure enveloping my skull. I could only watch in paralyzed horror as the shaggy, monstrous thing, the other thing, the one that actually seemed to belong to Liam's narrative, went to work on him. The sounds were sickeningly intimate. Wet tearing, the dull crunch of bone, and Liam's strangled, useless gargles, swallowed by the attacker's immense jaws. The collector in the charcoal suit remained impassive, its arm still extended, the light fixed solely on me. It was cataloging, analyzing the anomaly of my survival. The beast attacking Liam seemed to operate on instinct, hunger, retrieval. But the collector was systematic, cold, and utterly terrifying in its efficiency. It wasn't luck, the collector's voice echoed inside my head, devoid of tone, merely informational. The source of remission was relocated. It was stolen. The debt is due. The collateral must be seized. I don't know what you're talking about, I tried to shout, but the sound caught in my throat, emerging only as a pathetic croak. I strained against the pressure, my knuckles white against the fire poker, which was now lying uselessly beside my knee. Suddenly, the beast attacking Liam shifted its focus. It didn't finish its gruesome meal. Instead, it lifted its massive head, its ivory teeth slick dark, and let out a challenging, high-pitched snarl directed at the collector. The charcoal figure paused its interrogation of my mind, turning its featureless gaze toward the brute. A silent, terrifying standoff ensued, two apex predators occupying the same, relatively small space, one summoned by debt, the other guarding its stolen property. The brute, recognizing the superior, systematic threat of the collector, made a decision. With a final vicious snap that severed whatever vital structure it had been working on, it released Liam's ruined body and lunged, not at the collector, but toward the nearest exit, the gaping hole it had just created in the kitchen wall, heading back out into the night from whence it came. The collector didn't pursue. It allowed the beast to flee, its attention immediately snapping back to me. The white light intensified. The source must be returned, the mental voice insisted, the pressure becoming unbearable. I felt a cold tendril, a mental probe, attempting to breach the innermost sanctuary of my mind, the place where the memory of that impossible healing strength was stored. I knew, with chilling certainty, that if it found what it was looking for, it wouldn't just kill me. It would repossess the very thing that kept me alive. My entire existence, purchased through years of solitary struggle, was about to be auctioned off to an extra-dimensional repo man. In a desperate final surge of sheer unthinking self-preservation, the same instinct that kept me fighting the cancer cells day after day, I channeled every scrap of willpower I possessed. I didn't try to push the light away. Instead, I drove the memory forward, weaponizing the moment of my greatest vulnerability. The poker. I seized the iron poker, not as a physical weapon against the collector, but as a conduit. As I lunged forward with it, aiming for the smooth obsidian surface of its face, I simultaneously focused every ounce of my mental energy on the exact point where the white light was connecting with my mind. The collision was instantaneous and catastrophic. The steel tip of the poker connected with the collector's chest, sinking into the light-absorbing fabric as if it were butter. At the exact same microsecond, the raw, chaotic surge of my suppressed memory, the energy that had countered my cancer, slammed against the precise point of the collector's probing light. There was no sound this time, only an overwhelming flash of absolute blackness that consumed everything. The air turned instantly cold, dropping perhaps 50 degrees in a second. The pressure vanished. When my vision cleared, sputtering back into focus, I was still leaning over the desk, the fire poker embedded deep in the charcoal suit. But the collector was gone, not evaporated, not retreated, simply absent. The space where it stood was empty, leaving only a faint lingering scent of ozone and stale dust. I staggered back, breathing raggedly, the silence of the house deafening after the psychic battle. I looked past the desk, toward the wreckage of the hallway. Liam lay there, motionless, his form barely recognizable beneath the pooled blood and the shadows. I had won this round. I had forced the debt collector to retreat. I had survived the man who abandoned me, and I had survived the things he brought back with him. I was safe. Or so I thought, until I turned fully toward the front of the house, surveying the damage, the fallen door, the empty porch, and noticed something I hadn't seen during the blinding confrontation. Embedded in the splintered wood of the doorframe, inches from where the collector had stood, was a small, smooth, perfectly spherical object, no bigger than a marble, glowing with a faint, internal amber light. It looked entirely organic, pulsing slowly, and it was radiating a heat that felt suspiciously familiar. It was the source Liam had stolen, and as I took a hesitant step toward it, the amber sphere pulsed once, brightly, and I realized with a sickening jolt that the feeling wasn't familiar because of the cancer. It was familiar because the energy signature emanating from that object was exactly the same as the surge of impossible vitality I had felt the day my last scan came back clear. And just then, from the darkness of the kitchen wreckage, where the other beast had fled, I heard a faint, whimpering sound, entirely human, entirely terrified, and undeniably coming from the pile of gore that was once Liam. The whimpering sound from the kitchen wreckage snapped me out of my horrified fixation on the amber sphere. It was a frail, thin sound completely at odds with the brutal violence that had just erupted. I didn't want to look, praying it was just a dying spasm, an echo in the carnage, but I couldn't ignore the possibility, the infinitesimal, insane possibility, that Liam hadn't been entirely consumed. Gripping the fire poker still lodged in the empty space where the collector had been, I edged toward the kitchen. The massive hole in the wall gaped open to the cool night air, smelling of upturned earth and rain. The fur-covered brute was gone, having made its escape, taking the bulk of its meal with it. What remained was a gruesome, indistinct mass on the floor. But tucked tightly against the demolished base of the linen closet, half shielded from the main brutality, was a small, curled-up shape. It wasn't Liam. It was a child, a boy, no older than 7 or 8, shivering violently, clutching his knees to his chest. His clothes were thin, torn and smeared with dark, terrifying stains that might have been mud or something much, much worse. His eyes, wide with shock, were fixed on me. "Don't hurt me," the boy whispered, his voice cracking. He said I had to stay hidden. Who said? I asked, my voice gentler than I thought possible, lowering the poker slightly. The terror of the collector, the immediate threat of repossession, suddenly felt secondary to this fragile, terrified life deposited in the ruins of my home. My dad, the boy choked out, nodding toward the remains near the desk. He told me to hide when the quiet man came. He told me the big one was coming for the light. My breath hitched. Liam had a son, a secret son, hidden from me during my darkest hours, a child somehow involved in this supernatural transaction. Liam hadn't just stolen the source of my remission, he had stolen a literal piece of life energy, the Amber Sphere, and used it perhaps to heal himself, perhaps to keep this child alive, and now the collectors were here to collect the principal. I looked back at the amber marble lying by the door, the core of my inexplicable survival, now sitting innocently on my Persian rug. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that leaving the sphere was not an option. The collector would return, stronger perhaps, and the savage brute that consumed Liam would likely circle back if it sensed the source was unguarded. I had to end this cycle, not just for me, but for this boy who was clearly collateral in a debt I never agreed to pay. I moved toward the Amber Sphere, my movement slow and deliberate, ignoring the wreckage. As my hand closed around the warm, pulsing object, the sense of vitality flooded me again. But this time, it wasn't just defensive. It felt like a massive wellspring of directed potential. I turned to the boy, holding the sphere loosely in my palm. "What happens if the light leaves?" I asked him. The boy looked at the sphere, then back toward the kitchen wreckage where his father lay. A profound sadness washed over his small features. Dad said if the collectors take the light, the price is paid. Everything they took comes back. He pointed a trembling finger toward the ruined section of the wall where the beast had exited. He said that one. That's what happens when the price isn't paid in time. The brute hadn't fled to safety. It had retreated to wait, perhaps even to regenerate. I looked from the sphere to the hole in the wall, then down at the broken man who had betrayed me, and finally at the innocent child who was now my responsibility. Liam had left me to die alone, but in his final act of desperation, he had inadvertently entrusted me with his son and the key to stopping whatever cosmic loan shark was circling my property. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I walked over to the hole in the wall, ignoring the protests starting to build in my mind about the sheer insanity of what I was about to do. I held the Amber Sphere out into the cool night air, offering it toward the darkness where the beast had vanished. "You want the source," I called out into the night, my voice ringing with a conviction born of 3 years of solitary defiance. "Take it. But you leave the boy and you leave me alone, or I swear I will burn every last piece of the debt you're trying to collect." I hurled the Amber Sphere with all my strength into the night, watching it arc across the yard, an incandescent beacon against the dark. It landed silently in the wet earth near the edge of the garden bed. For a long, excruciating moment, nothing happened. Then, a heavy, shuddering inhalation echoed from the shadows beyond the fence line, followed by the sound of massive paws scrambling away, faster than before, fleeing the source it had been sent to guard or reclaim. The threat from the brute was receding. I waited until the silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle drip of water from the broken gutter. The collector had not returned. The beast was gone. The immediate danger had passed. I turned back to the house, to the boy, and to Liam's body. The ordeal was over. The house was wrecked, my sanity questioned, my past resurrected, but I was alive, and Liam's son was alive. I walked back to the center of the room, intending to comfort the boy, when my foot brushed against something cold and hard near the fireplace grate. I looked down. It was Liam's wallet, ejected during the struggle, lying open. Inside, nestled in the clear plastic sleeve where his driver's license should have been, was a folded piece of heavy, creamy stationery, the same expensive type he used to write his absurdly detached breakup note. My hands trembled again, but this time not from fear, but but from a slow-burning, righteous anger. I unfolded the note. It wasn't an apology. It was a single, hastily scrawled line, written perhaps just before he knocked. The boy isn't mine. He's the interest. And the collectors know you're the one who paid the principal.